welcome. My name is Bailey Raber, and this is Unveiling the Realities, Women Behind Bars in the United States. So, let's start by discussing what a day in the life of a woman prisoner currently looks like. Now, if you've seen the Netflix series Orange is the New Black, you likely have a very skewed and unrealistic idea of what prison actually looks like for women. So, thanks to journalist Hope Racine and her article, A Day in the Life of a Female Prisoner, which she wrote for Bustle.com, we're going to get a realistic idea of what prison life actually is like. So, let's go ahead and dive on in. Prisoners typically wake up between 5 and 6 a.m. in the morning to be counted and checked by guards. Almost all prisons have inmates share cells. Sometimes women will share with 1 or 3 other women, but some prisons, such as the Lincoln Correctional Facility in Indiana, have up to 20 women sharing one large room. If the inmate has a job in the prison's kitchens, the day can start as early as 3:30 or 4 a.m. Right after waking up, inmates will go to breakfast, where they typically have about 30 minutes to eat. Then they go to their various jobs. Every prisoner is expected to have a job, ranging from working in the kitchen to taking out trash. Prisoners fulfill janitorial roles, they serve food, they work on construction crews, they'll do laundry and other miscellaneous tasks. Depending on how time-consuming the job is, prisoners are expected to work until lunchtime. Prisoners do get paid for their jobs, but according to the Prison Policy Initiative, many prisoners only make about 93 cents a day, while some facilities award inmates only $15 a month. Like breakfast, inmates receive 30 minutes to an hour to eat lunch before returning to their jobs or being able to enjoy their free time. Depending on the facility and the nature of their crime, female prisoners can often receive more freedom than their male counterparts. And during the day, they often have access to gyms, bathroom facilities, the library, and other recreational areas. By 3 p.m., the workday typically ends. At the end of the workday, inmates can go to the prison yard for an hour or return to their cells, depending on how much freedom the facility may give them. At 5 p.m., they will typically have dinner. After dinner, their schedules are flexible. Some facilities offer religious services in the evenings, and some provide counseling or rehabilitation courses. However, due to low budgets, many women's prisons do not offer these types of resources for their inmates. In the evening, most prisoners are allowed to go to sleep anywhere from 8 p.m. till midnight. Many facilities typically turn off the lights around 11 p.m., but during the time when prisoners return to their cells, they have relative freedom to choose their activities. At night, the inmates are counted again. They're actually counted several times during the day, and they will then go to sleep. The next morning, the cycle will repeat yet again. Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of what prison is actually like for women today, let's go ahead and rewind a couple decades or maybe even a whole century, and let's try to get a good understanding of what prison was like in the past for women here in the United States. So in order to answer this question, I'm going to discuss an article that I found which talks about the history of Colorado Women's Prison, which was part of the state penitentiary in Cannon City, Colorado. So let's dive on in and take a look at this. Originally, the prison housed only men, as women would be sent to jails in the local sheriff's offices. Everything changed when Dr. Mary Solander arrived in March of 1873, which marked the beginning of integrating women into the previously all-male prison system. Eventually, it was decided to separate the women from the men, and the first building to house women inmates was built in 1884, containing only 6 cells. 3 other buildings were built later on, one in 1895, a second one in 1908, and then the third and final one built in 1934, all of which was due to overcrowding. From 1904 until the 1920s, women at the prison spent time cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, gardening, and making underclothing for male inmates. But recreational activities such as elementary reading and writing classes and croquet in the courtyard were available as a reward for good behavior. Female inmates were also given the opportunity to further their education through elementary reading and writing classes. In the year 1934, prisoners constructed a 2-story stucco building to house female inmates, which then resulted in Colorado becoming one of the first states in the Rocky Mountain West to have a women's prison. So, after the building was finished, they took away all vocational training from the women inmates and handed it over to the men. The guys were being prepped for life after prison, while the women weren't given any similar chances. Instead, they continued to be taught things that were considered of domestic science because that was seen as valuable for them at that time. While male prisoners got classes from community volunteers and clergy, the women's building didn't even have proper classrooms. They had to learn things like sewing or music in the hallway or in the dining room. And this type of setup stuck around until the mid-1950s. So I'm not really sure if I should be surprised or if I should have expected this, but a day in the life of a woman prisoner hasn't really changed much in the past 100 plus years. So the daily life of women inmates in the 1940s was documented by Helen Kinney, a former matron at this women's prison. So the matrons kept order in the women's prison in shift rotations. The head matron came in around 7 a.m. and stayed until 3 p.m. Every morning, women inmates performed domestic chores and were expected to clean their cells, which were referred to as houses back then. So each house contained a bed, a toilet, a sink, and a cupboard. When the afternoon matron arrived around 3 p.m. and would stay until 11 p.m., she made sure that all of the chores had been done and made sure that the women went to sleep at 9 p.m. The night matron would then come at 11 p.m. and she stayed until 7 a.m. when the head matron came once again. The night matron performed hourly checks on inmates to make sure that they were all in their cells. Also, I think it's very interesting to note that part of Helen Kinney's accounts say that many women came into the prison with tattoos, especially those who had been in the Navy, which nowadays, everybody has tattoos, no big deal, right? Back then, tattoos were a bit more taboo. So if you know anything about the history of tattoos, or especially of the military and the Navy, you would definitely understand this aspect. But what I find to be very interesting and also super concerning is that she states that the tattoos were removed by the on-site dentist as part of the women's rehabilitation and reformation philosophy and practice. So first of all, I think that that's incredibly inhumane because I doubt that these women were giving consent, especially because it was part of a rehabilitation and reformation philosophy from back then. Yeah, and the second thing that's even more concerning to me is that the on-site dentist was performing this. So I think it's pretty clear to say that we aren't doing this these days, that women are not having tattoos removed, especially by force or anything like that. So this is a massive difference in between the two. And also considering the amount of undocumented occurrences that happen in prison, which we will get to more of that here in a moment, I would not be surprised if a bunch of other things were going on back then that were just undocumented. Okay, so speaking of women and unreported incidents occurring, let's go ahead and discuss the statistics and the information regarding women being sexually assaulted while in prison. Oh man, so this one is not a fun topic, as you can imagine. And so the adult correctional authorities reported over 2,600 inmate on inmate and over 2,200 staff on inmate substantiated sexual victimizations in the years 2016 to 2018 alone. So that's just one area where I have pulled some data. But let's actually take a moment and specifically discuss the sexual assault issues that occur at Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. In January 2014, an investigation was led by the Justice Department at Tutwiler Prison. They found that the prison staff have raped, sodomized, fondled, and exposed themselves to the prisoners. They've also coerced prisoners to engage in oral sex. They themselves have engaged in voyeurism, watching women while they shower and use the toilet. And they've also subjected women to a daily barrage of sexually explicit verbal abuse. Prison officials would then punish women who reported the sexual abuse, and therefore the prison does not adequately investigate these allegations. So, despite the known high rate of sexual contact between male staff and incarcerated women, the warden and correctional officers at Tutwiler continue to punish and humiliate women who report sexual misconduct, routinely placing them in segregation, stripping them of their property, denying them contact with their families, and even forcing them to submit to unwanted medical procedures, which again, to me, that constitutes as inhumane. So the Equal Justice Initiative, the source where all of this information has been publicly provided that I've been, discussing with you here and now, they also found evidence that prison officials at Tutwiler were misreporting the frequency of sexual assaults by prison employees, which to me is unsurprising. Considering the misconduct and the mistreatment of these women who tried to report it, I am not at all surprised that they were misreporting the actual accounts. And again, this kind of, rotates back to what I was discussing a few moments ago about Helen Kinney's accounts that she notated within the Colorado women's prison back in the early 1900s. So I feel like this is a trend where women in prison, things occur, misbehaviors occur to them from staff members, from people who are supposed to be guarding them, wardens, officers, whoever, people who are just supposed to overlook and oversee them. They are misbehaving and mistreating these women, and nothing is happening. They're not getting in trouble. It's not getting reported. And we probably don't have near as much data as we should about these circumstances and these instances, which is really, really concerning. And as any woman who is watching right now, you should be very concerned too. Even if you don't plan to go to prison, which I don't know about you, I don't plan to go to prison. But for womankind, I am concerned in general. So to continue on our discussion about sexual assault on women by male officers or male staff members of prison, let's kind of talk about what happens to a woman who might become pregnant from one of these assaults that occur while she is incarcerated. So in order to do this, let's continue discussing the issues at Tutwiler Prison for Women in Alabama. They have long had the highest rate of sexual assault in the United States among all correctional facilities for women. So these women will often become pregnant, and they are sometimes even forced to undergo medical procedures because of it. And when I say medical procedures, I think we all know what we're talking about here, which is unfortunately abortion. So this right there is incredibly concerning, not just because the women are being impregnated by these guards and these officers, but more importantly, how they're being treated, and probably unreported, undocumented, maybe even unqualified doctors coming in and performing these, quote, medical procedures to, quote, fix the problem. All of which is incredibly concerning. So upon further investigation, it seems like Tutwiler and officials from the Alabama Department of Corrections actually got quite a few complaints about sexual misconduct involving the male staff and female prisoners, specifically between the years 2004 and 2011. So the clear signs of this illegal behavior are the pregnancies that resulted from it, which, I mean, come on, like that to me, that's an obvious. Like if people start popping up pregnant in a prison, we all know who's causing it if it's a woman's prison. Like, I just can't believe the stupidity there. Sorry. I just have to point that out. So, for example, in 2010, a woman in custody had a baby after being raped by a correctional officer at the Tutwiler prison. So, over the last 5 years, the EJI has heard lots of complaints from women who got pregnant after being raped by male staff. So, sadly, even when instances where sexual abuse was confirmed, the perpetrators received little more than just a slap on the wrist. So, this is what EJI Executive Director Brian Stevenson told MSNBC. So, he went on to say that in the last 2 years, the person who received the harshest sentence was a man who got 6 months in jail for raping and impregnating a incarcerated woman in the prison he worked at. When the baby was born and the DNA confirmed it was his, that was the sentence that he got for it. Had the rape occurred outside the prison confines, the sentence would have been 50 years to life in prison. That is what Executive Director Brian Stevenson is saying, that it would have been 50 years to life had he done this outside of prison grounds, had it been to a woman who was not incarcerated. So, to further answer the question on what happens to women who are impregnated by rape during their time in prison, I have found a horrifying example about a woman named Daisy Link. She has been incarcerated in a Miami-Dade jail, specifically the Turner Guilford Night Correctional Center, and she's been there since 2022. So this story was actually made public by CBS News earlier in January of this year, January 2024, when Daisy was found to be 4 months pregnant. Now, listen here. I understand that most people hate doing math, so I'm going to be kind and I'm going to do it for you. So let's just say that Daisy was incarcerated in December of 2022. So had she conceived her baby just before entering into the prison system, she would have given birth in roughly September of 2023, which is approximately 9 months later. So that said, there is absolutely no way she entered into the prison as a pregnant woman. Therefore, discovering that she is 4 months pregnant in January of 2024 means that she actually must have conceived sometime in September of 2023, which is at minimum 9 months into her sentencing if she did enter in at the end of 2022. Yeah, that is very upsetting. So Daisy's sister, Crystal Barreto, told CBS News that they never tried to give her sister a rape treatment. They never tried to actually see what really happened to her. Now they're coming up with all these different stories that they're trying to make up in order to cover it up. So we don't know what's going to happen to her, but we do know that Daisy should not be 4 months pregnant in that TGK jail. So Crystal went on to say that Daisy called us today and she told us that she is in fear of her life. She's in fear that they're going to send in some of the other prison girls to beat her up and make her purposely have a miscarriage. She also says that they're trying to mentally break her down in there. So all of which, we can see is very, very concerning that women are being treated this way in prison. They literally can't stand up for themselves. What are they supposed to do? What are they supposed to do? So this raises our next question, which is, do pregnant women receive the proper care and treatment needed throughout their pregnancy to ensure that the baby is well taken care of? So the short answer to that is no. So as the prison system was initially structured to primarily cater to male inmates, prenatal care for pregnant inmates is often complicated and it lacks the proper initiatives to best support these women. So let me just also throw out there that if we're not supporting these women, we're not supporting these babies. These babies did nothing to go to jail. They are innocent little creatures, and they've done nothing wrong. But if we don't give their mother the support and care that it's needed, that baby's not going to have a fighting chance. It's not going to have a fighting chance. It's not. I found an article titled Perinatal Needs of Pregnant Incarcerated Women within the Journal of Perinatal Education, which reported that women inmates lack adequate prenatal care offering medical, nutritional, educational, environmental, and family support services. When birth takes place in prison, separation of mother and child occurs almost immediately, which further compromises a critical bonding period. Sadly, prisons are not mandated to provide physical or mental health services to inmates and are not subject to external review. No organizations assess quality of care or set standards for the care of inmates. Most prison healthcare systems function independently, have no checks and balances, and are isolated from the outside medical community, which, as you can understand, is incredibly problematic. Let me read you an example of what many pregnant women face while incarcerated. A woman who we will call Anna spent the last 2 weeks of her pregnancy in preterm labor shackled to a hospital bed. If she needed to use the bathroom or even turn over, she had to beg permission of the officer on duty. Given these strict security arrangements, you might assume that Anna was a hardened criminal at risk for escape. No, Anna is a minimum security prisoner currently serving an approximately 18-month sentence for drug possession and probation violation. So, continuing with the topic of pregnancy in prison, another question that is raised to concern is, do these women get additional food privileges, and are they allowed special diets for the sake of the baby? So, in my research, what I found is not only do pregnant inmates not get special diets to support the health of the baby, but they are often not given any extra food. So let's discuss the experience of one particular woman. Her name is Crystal Muniz, as she entered into the Ector County Detention Center located in Texas during her last trimester of pregnancy. So she told journalist Victoria Law in an article on truthout.org that each day she was brought the same meal: beans, cornbread, and bologna, even though lunch meats can cause listeria in pregnant people and sometimes result in serious illness for the fetuses. Muniz states that she requested extra fruits and vegetables to no avail. Additionally, the jail did not supply any prenatal vitamins, and her husband attempted to navigate the jail bureaucracy to bring her a bottle of the vitamins, but despite his efforts, she never received them. So, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists states that pregnant people should drink at least 8 to 12 cups of water each day, which, guys, I mean, I don't know about you, but actually, I'm pretty sure that all humans should be drinking 8 to 10 glasses of water per day. So, if you're pregnant, you definitely need to be drinking because you are working for two, right? But Muniz recalled during her time in prison that meals were the only times that the jail provided drinking water. Otherwise, women would have to drink water from the bathroom sink, which is the same sink where people brush their teeth, wash their hands, and wash their panties. And she noted that it was right next to the toilet, which we all know is unsanitary. Just all of this. We shouldn't be drinking water like that, but most specifically not when we're pregnant. So I think what's also just really, really just interesting, and I think even more concerning, is that this is happening in Texas, where everybody is, unborn babies are so important. We have the whole issue of an abortion. But yet this unborn baby who is in the belly of a incarcerated woman doesn't matter. This baby doesn't count, right? That's kind of what the message is being sent right now, which again is incredibly concerning and, in my opinion, also a bit hypocritical coming from the state. So, lastly, let's bring up the topic of transgender women in prison, and does their experience differ from that of cisgender women? So, the short answer is absolutely. It absolutely differs, and it actually differs depending especially on what state you live in. So that's another fascinating thing too, because each state is allotted their own policy on how to decide where to house an inmate, whether that be based upon biological sex, gender identity, primary physical sexual characteristics, or on a case by case basis. So, due to this, many transgender women end up being placed into a male prison system. So, this might seem like no big deal, right? Because, hey, it might be nice to be surrounded by men when you're a transgender woman who's attracted to men, right? Well, think again. So, I'm going to take a moment to read an article written by BC Brand as she explores the realities and the truths of what it's like being a transgender woman locked away in a male prison institution. So, let's hear a word from her. People assume that all LGBTQIA plus people, specifically trans women in male facilities, love their time in prison because being around a bunch of sex-deprived and affection-craving men, ready and willing to shower us with attention, is our dream come true. Yet, the aforementioned characteristics of the environment can be, and usually are, very dangerous. Contrary to what people believe, being around all these men doesn't make it easier or more desirable for us. Our everyday journey and battles of prison, such as missing home, trying to survive economically, dealing with the stigma that exists about being trans, and the unhidden bias, disgust, and contempt from most officers and inmates still exist. Also, more often than not, we face rejection, ridicule, and hostility from the cis gay men who we seek community with. For example, let's say a trans woman did decide to engage in a physical or even emotional romantic relationship. The fact is, the majority of any prison relationships, even consensual ones, are toxic and danger prone. Most men are looking at you more so as property than as anything else. Also, a large number of trans women, and almost all that I've personally met, have had no outside assistance or family due to being trans. So, the mindset that they have to do whatever they need to do by any means because no one is going to do anything for them leads many of them to join the sex trade. Whether consensual or not, sex is forbidden according to prison policy. So you're rolling the dice if you choose to engage in sex, from increasing your chances of contracting a sexually transmitted disease or from being in a situation that will lead to rape. BC then goes on to say, I read somewhere once that trans women in a male facility are up to 13 times more likely to be sexually assaulted or raped than a cis gay male inmate. Out of the 5 trans women at my current facility, 3 of them, including me, have said that they've been raped or sexually assaulted in the last 3 years. So after listening to BC Brand's story, I think that we can successfully conclude that it is different, but it's also kind of the same. It's different in the sense that transgender women are being sent to male prisons, which, to be honest, that sounds pretty terrifying. That really, really, truly does. But they are facing similar problems that women are facing in terms of sexual assault and harassment, it seems. Although I will point out that I think one of the main differences is that the women in women's prisons, they tend to have more communities, and they form little what they call families where they kind of support each other. Whereas it sounds like in the male prisons, if you are a transgender woman and you are stuck in a male prison, you are just kind of SOL. You might be on your own. You might be ostracized. You might be cast out from all the other men in your block, in your cell. You might be picked on. You might be bullied. You might be sexually assaulted and raped by other inmates. So, to me, that's almost just as terrifying, if not more terrifying, than just being a woman in a woman's prison. So, in conclusion, the realities of life for women behind bars far differs that from what we've seen in things such as the Netflix series Orange is the New Black. I mean, we all know that Hollywood has a way of glamorizing things, but this far differs what these women really truly face. And personally, before, engaging in this project, I wasn't fully aware of how harsh these conditions are. Again, I mentioned I don't plan to go to prison. It's never really been part of my life goals, but if for some reason I were to end up there, these are the realities that I would be facing. These are the harsh conditions that I would be subjected to, and the loss of rights and the fear for my safety. And so I'm going to leave you with this. What can we do as a society to bring more awareness in order to bring about change and to make prison a less unsafe place for people? Yes, I do believe people need to be punished for their actions. I am totally for that. But to what extent? To what extent? There are prisons all around the world where people are serving their time and they are being punished appropriately, yet they're not in fear of their safety. They're not in fear of their life. And they're still serving out what they need to. So, what can we do as a country in order to bring about more awareness and garner some change for the American prison system? So that is what I'm going to leave with you, and I really truly hope that this has been both informative and educational for you, and that you can help in this fight for bringing awareness and bringing justice to people who aren't able to do so for themselves. So, thank you for your time.